Welcome to the Top Order podcast, beaming from two hemispheres for the foreseeable future. We're going to talk a lot of hemispheres in terms of our roundup today. New Zealand versus India. New Zealand's monumental 3-0 victory. We'll have the aftermath not quite immediately. We'll also talk plenty of white ball cricket as well, with T20 and one-day international series going on all around the world. We'll talk some New Zealand, Sri Lanka, white ball, Australia, Pakistan, and a little bit of England, West Indies as well. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned.
Oh, good work, Raj.
Well, boys, we've had the Slack channel going mental over the course of the last couple of weeks. We've not really been able to talk about this in the immediate aftermath of this New Zealand-India series, and we're on the white ball merry-go-round again in terms of TV coverage. But look, we're going to dominate this podcast, I think, with our thoughts on this 3-0 series victory and just how impactful it is, how big a deal this is for the Black Caps in India, and I guess in a world cricket scenario as well. Well, you know, what does this mean for me and Baldy, who continually go on about India being, a really, really hard place to go alongside Australia? The Black Caps making it look very, very easy. And we'll also, I think, have to have some questions for India as well, in terms of, some of their side reaching, let's say, the sort of winterland of their careers. Is this going to have any impact on that in the very, very near future? But look, we've got to start with you, Stu and Raj, in terms of just those thoughts and feelings and emotions after a bit of time to reflect on a 3-0 series victory away from home in India, where even you boys weren't expecting to win like you were in Sri Lanka.
It is amazing, isn't it? It's been a weird week, having almost a week to reflect. I think it was happening. I think the game was finishing about this time last week. We were sort of sitting there, figuring out when we would try and record and what we would try and do, because I was away all week. So we've decided, Binksy's obviously, on the other side of the world. You guys were a bit out of action certain days. So we decided to take the time because we wanted to stick together and actually be here to discuss. And it's sort of, for me, it's been a week of smiling and grinning the whole time, just because, I was so excited, but also kind of still trying to figure out, like, did this actually happen? Because, you talk about, you said before, we didn't expect to win. We didn't expect to win a test. Like, I can still remember 2 weeks ago, which wasn't that long ago, being like getting my kids, making sure they stayed up for that evening when New Zealand won that first test in India, because it was such a monumental thing. It was, you must watch this, because I haven't seen this, in my whole cricket watching. I was alive when it happened 36 years ago, but I hadn't seen New Zealand win a test in India. So, to go from that point where to where we are now, we've won 3-0, it's pretty staggering.
Yeah, I mean, just talking about that third test in particular, I had friends who were like, oh, we didn't start very well. We haven't gone well in the first innings or whatever. I just don't care. I don't care whether we win or lose this third test. If someone had given me 2-1 in India 4 weeks ago, before this tour started, I would have bitten their hand off.
Well, Stu was biting her hand off at the thought of taking a draw prior to the start of the series. So to go into the last test 2-0 up, you're playing with house money in that sense.
Absolutely, and I think the thing is, like we said it last time, right? We did this comprehensively. Like this game was, the closest of them all, I suppose. It got down to 25 runs. I was in a motel room watching it all play out. It was 31 for 5, and I had to go out for a dinner. Got back, thanks to technology, I was able to, then rewind and actually carry on from where I started from. But sort of this whole series, it's been one where, I don't know, you guys know what I'm like as a fan. I sort of lose control of my body. Glenn Phillips bowled Akash deep through the gate, and my hands were just pumping on this motel bed. It's just been such an exciting series for us, as New Zealand fans, Binksy.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Let's not edit one little snippet of that last comment. So yeah, fist pumping on a hotel bed. We won't put that as an Instagram reel. But yeah, look, I said last week or a couple of weeks ago, and look, I was slightly trying to wind you up, Stu. I said, if you win it 2-1, is there always that sort of, this wasn't a 5-match series, and Indian fans on the Twitter sphere could potentially say, well, this is why New Zealand deserve a 5-match series against us to prove if they were really good enough. But yeah, to actually win 3-0, there's no questions about that. And I think the simple fact that your spinners have outbowled India's spinners, your batters have outbatted Indian batters, and Tom Latham's captaincy as well, which I think someone's put down in the Slack channel. We had some question marks about that, but you cannot argue with with obviously a 3-0 series victory. And I guess it probably also raised a bit of Will Young's stock as well. Some valuable contributions from him throughout the course of the series as well. So look, all very, very rosy in the garden of New Zealand cricket after this.
Is there anywhere in particular you want to start from a performances perspective? Because as you mentioned, literally pretty much everyone stood up at some point or another during this whole series. Spinners, is that a great place to start?
Well, just before we do, can we just have a look at the financial situation of the Top Order podcast coffers now? But because of that series, all of Stu's purchase of stock on Will Young Island has paid absolute dividends. There are people flocking to move to Will Young Island now, and our portfolio looks terrific, and your property investments are starting to look very, very healthy. So thank you for making our coffers look really quite rosy going forward.
Thank you. I remember, I think about 3 weeks ago, being ridiculed for that stock. So I will certainly take that. And we'll come back to Will Young, because you said where I wanted to start. You talked about fist pumping on a hotel bedroom. The next line on my notes says spin porn. So
what time is it? Is it late enough to
we're gonna have to put the E-tag on this episode for the first time ever.
It is before the watershed in England, that's for sure. It's 7:30 in the morning here, and just if the IRD are listening, the coffers aren't that great, boys. So,
yeah, I mean, honestly, look, this was a pitch that spun from day one. So we were treated, I think, in terms of that as fans of spin bowling. But you just run through all of the bowlers in that game. Jadeja picks up a 10 for that's going to be completely forgotten, I suppose, in when people look back at this game. Washington Sundar again sort of found Rachin Ravindra's weak spot of the perfect ball that dips and pitches on middle and leg and hits the top of off. He found that again. Ravi Ashwin, I thought that the spell that he bowled of Dusra's was going to be the pivotal spell at one point. The one he bowled to Glenn Phillips, where Glenn Phillips gets bowled by the Dusra and is just completely baffled by what's going on, doesn't even realise that the ball's gone past him because it's such a good delivery, gets Will Young again with another one. I thought that was going to be the turning point. And then for all of that to happen, and then for Ajaz to get through, to win man of the match with, a truly remarkable performance when we thought, they had to chase a low total, but, we always did think if we could get a couple of wickets early. But for him to, bowl that whole innings and to bowl as well as he did. And, it's so funny, right? He still hasn't taken a wicket at home, Ajaz Patel.
How much does he love Mumbai?
Oh, we just got to rename it, don't we? We've got to rename that stadium. It's not the Wankhede Stadium anymore. It's the Ajaz Patel Stadium. He, takes a 10 for bowls New Zealand to a 3-0 whitewash. It's pretty stunning, to think about the career that he's had. Like I said, he hasn't taken a wicket at home. But he's bowled, his debut, he takes 5 for, bowls us to a 4-run victory against Pakistan. We end up winning that series, I think, for the first time in years and years and years. Then he goes on, him and Rachin defend with the bat to draw us a game in India, which was, an important moment at that time, gets 10 for, gets into this situation. And I think, Baldy, we were talking about those first 2 tests that Ajaz hadn't really played a part and that he hadn't really been able to get into the games in the way that he wanted. It was Santner, obviously, in that second test who shone. But I think that he's shown again that the more he bowls, the better sort of rhythm and confidence he gets. I think he talked about rhythm was one of the words he used in the press conference. And I just thought he did a tremendous job of doing what he does, which is just put the ball in the right areas over and over again. And he did that in that second innings in particular. And it was great to watch.
Yeah, two key changes from the first couple of tests in that he took more of the onus on himself to be the number one spinner. He had more energy on the ball. He looked like he had a little bit more energy through the crease. So that's a function of feeling good as a bowler. And he also bowled more balls in good areas than he had in those first two tests, right? So he bowled 2-3 good balls and over in the first two tests and then bowled one bad ball. You know what I mean? Across that whole test series on average. I'm not saying every over, but this test, he really put the onus on himself, and we saw the difference. Santner comes out, New Zealand missed Santner in that third test. Sodhi comes in, does an okay job, but it was really Santner and not Santner. It was really Ajaz and Phillips that did the damage for New Zealand, right?
Yeah. Do you want to talk about Phillips? Because I know you're obviously one of the bigger Glenn Phillips fans around, Raj, and he's gone from basically being someone who's got a bit of a golden arm. He's kind of, throw him the ball. He maybe he'll pick up a wicket. He's a golden arm. To he was given the ball in the most challenging situation where we're about to, he's entrusted with bowling at the other end to Ajaz when we're trying to win a test match over Ish Sodhi.
Yeah. I mean, even like if we're doing the spin sort of feedback sandwich, let me just do the middle part first. Okay. Ajaz, 100%, I thought that he's really struggled. Well, he looked like he struggled through the first two tests. Ended the series with 15 wickets, most for any bowler that we've got on tour there. But I think this series has actually shown that we're not going to need him when we're not on the subcontinent. It really has reinforced the fact that we have the likes of Santner, the likes of Glenn Phillips, who you mentioned when he was a golden arm. I remember when he was simply a really good wicketkeeper who batted in the top three. Like that is where he sort of started his game, but he has developed into someone that actually bowls incredible balls, that actually he was getting so much drift. I was really surprised with how much drift he was getting, and then to get it to rip away. He's developed into a bowler that's going to be more than enough for us in New Zealand conditions based on how we have structured our bowling attacks in the last few years. He's going to fill that role along with Santner, I think, very, very, very easily. I find it hard to judge his batting. I know we're not really talking about his batting at the moment, but hard to judge him at 7 because everything sort of gets papered over when you're winning, and he probably need to get more out of his batting. And if he had been batting at 5, I think that would be much more of a spotlight on him. But as a bowler, as a bowling all-rounder, or filling that role within the team, I think he's doing more than enough to fill this New Zealand side. Binksy?
Yeah, look, I was just going to ask Stu really the question around what does this mean for spin stocks moving forwards, and Raj, you said it actually reinforces that you're not going to use Ajaz. I was going to ask you the opposite question. Does this actually mean that you pick your best spinner regardless of the conditions moving forwards? And really, just how do you feel about that? If it is a case of we've got someone that can do enough of a job in our home conditions, because you've got a feel for Ajaz in terms of what he's done away from home, and then the fact that he isn't going to get to walk out at the basin too often, or hear the Barmy Army come up with a song about him at Mount Maunganui. So yeah, just thoughts really, I guess, on is that really the way that his career is going to pan out now, Stu?
It's interesting, because we could have Ajaz, Santner and Will Young, 2 players of the match and a player of the series, and none of them play in the first home test of our New Zealand summer. We'll come back to Will Young, but I do think that it's going to. I don't necessarily think that they will do anything about trying to find a way to get Ajaz into the side, but I do think they should be thinking, hey, look, our spinners have actually done a really good job. Obviously, it's not going to turn like it turned, in those last 2 tests over in India. Like, they're not going to get the assistance over here in New Zealand. But I think they should be thinking, particularly with the Ben Sears injury, particularly with England struggling against spin in Pakistan. Completely different scenario again. They had the fans out. I don't think we're going to get giant fans and moving them all around Wellington.
One of the grounds is sponsored by Kennards. Just hire as much as you need to do it.
Exactly. I think there should be some thought to, okay, well, we don't necessarily, we still want to focus our attack on our 3-seamers, 4-seamers, but we should be thinking, okay, like we actually have some spinners who can do a job, can pick up some wickets. The Basin last year, Nathan Lyon, destroyed New Zealand. Even in when South Africa was here, Dane Pete looked very threatening. There is some spin in some of the wickets here in New Zealand, and we should be now thinking, okay, like Phillips, Ravindra, those two in particular should be thinking, we've got, Phillips already has, but Ravindra as well. I would love to see, what an attack if we can build our attack and have those two in the top 7 who can actually bowl and contribute. And Phillips, like I said, massive credit to him to being able to get to that point where he can do that, because you really thought a couple of years ago at least, like this is sort of he's just so talented that he can have a bowl because he can kind of do a job. He can come on and get you, sneak through 2 overs, pick you up a wicket in a one-day game. But yeah, to be able to go and win us, contribute to winning us a test match with the ball, it's fantastic.
I mean, he's also, the wickets he's taking, I've got down here, Kohli, Pant, Jaswal, Sundar, Jadeja. Like, there's not bunnies that he's getting out. He's getting out decent batsmen.
No, there's no tail burglary involved in here. And just to pick up on your point earlier, Stu, about New Zealand taking spinners forward into the home summer, on the basis of evidence, you would have to say now that Santner and Ajaz, and this would be heresy 2 years ago, that Santner and Ajaz are in the top 5 New Zealand bowlers that you've got going around available to you, assuming that everyone is fit. I think they're in the top 5 now. So it's not a case of, we can only play them when conditions really suit us. As you've said, there have been conditions in New Zealand where overseas spinners have come in and done a really good job. And I think they deserve consideration going forward to be part of that side on a more permanent basis at home. Not in all conditions, but certainly more permanent basis.
Do you feel like perhaps we're getting a bit carried away with it? And when I'm saying we, like I think about in the last time we were in India, Ajaz took 10 for in one innings. He didn't play a test back when New Zealand. Are we getting are we just going to go back to the old faithful for New Zealand of our 4-seamers?
I think the scenario was different then, because the 4-seamers you had were Southee, Bolt, Wagner and Jamieson. You don't have any of those available to you.
Southee.
Well, you've got Southee, but he's at the tail end of his career, right? So you don't have any of those guys at their pomp available to you this time around. So I think you have to have a different line of thinking. As good as Will O'Rourke is, and I think he's an absolute find for New Zealand. He is rising in terms of his stock going forward for New Zealand. But I think you've got to start looking at, actually, is the way we've always done things the best way for us to go forward in this particular circumstance?
And you go, Banksy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, a bowler that we've not mentioned is Matt Henry. And I know we were focused, as we always are, on spin. But yeah, I guess he played 2 of the test matches, didn't he? I think, we've always talked about how good he is, but just how much impact he had on this series. And he's really the guy that's going to lead that seam attack. And Bordy, you allude to it. You've got the likes of Will O'Rourke coming through. He's going to need someone, to be at mid-off. A little bit like a Jimmy Anderson figure, sort of talking to him and talking about how he's going to execute his plans potentially as a young seamer. But yeah, Matt Henry, I thought was sensational. Economy was there. I think he took 10 or 11 wickets or something like that throughout the course of the two test matches. Is he the leader of that seam attack now as you move into your domestic summer, do you think?
Oh, I think there's no question. Yeah, I mean, I think the shift from Southee, as captain signalled that to me more than anything. It was more. I think they'll look back at those 2 tests in Sri Lanka now and go, we really missed a trick not having Matt Henry. I know that conditions again were very, very different. We had opportunities to win that first test. The pitches were spin friendly again, but I think that it's clear that. Henry is the number one. And in saying that, I do think that Southee deserves a lot of credit for the way he bounced back in this India series. He certainly picked up his pace from the Sri Lanka series. He certainly, even in this game that he didn't play, this last game, I think he stood up as a leader. There was a moment where I think it was I think Will O'Rourke dropped the catch early on in one of those innings, and you could see Southey was on the field, or it was Chapman. Someone dropped a catch, I remember, and Southey was out there, and he ran straight over to Chapman. As the specialist fielder, he ran straight over to him, and gave him a high five. Like, really showed some leadership, and obviously he was the leader of this team. You sort of hope that that's still happening, but he didn't drop his lip for not being in the team. He really was part of that series. He took the catch that sealed the 2-0 win. Yeah, I'm really, really impressed with the way he bounced back, because it must have been tough for him to lose that captaincy. Even he would have known he wasn't at his best, but to go and do that, yeah, big credit to him.
Chapman, a gun fielder, should have also taken that catch.
Yes, that was woeful.
But no, I 100% agree. I think the torch has been passed. I think that you're looking at Will O'Rourke and Matt Henry being the sort of, the first two names on the sheet when it comes to bowling in most conditions. I think Southey has done a really good job sort of finding a bit of pace from somewhere. His contributions to the series have been immense as well. You're talking about the leadership stuff. His wickets, he got Rohit Sharma out twice in first innings, both first and second tests, I believe.
Made runs?
Yep, he actually scored more runs than Blundell in this series. But no, I think that's what it looks like from a sort of a three-pronged attack. I think those guys are definitely there. Kyle Jamieson is the one that we want to get back on the park as well to help, and it adds that more balance to our side, because I think there's a strange dynamic with our tail now. We've never really been, since Chris Martin left, we've actually had sort of people who could hold a stick all the way down, but I feel like we've got a bit of a liability down the bottom of the order now a little bit. They more than make up for it with the ball, but still, that's. I think those three are when talking about bowling, those are the three seamers that I think we'll have going forward.
Should we shift to batting now in terms of the selection? Because I think before we get to Will Young, I do want to just shout out Daryl Mitchell from that game, because I think, Baldy, you said in the last game, he's a quality player, he'll stand up, and that's exactly what he did in that first innings. I would love one of those, stories where it comes out that he lost, 5 kgs in that middle session of that first day. I'd love to actually know what the number was, because there was just pools of water dripping from him at all moments. He looked like he could have passed out at any time in that session.
He looks like one of those guys that sweats a lot, though. There was one in every cricket team you played in. He is the guy that's got all the drying space in the changing room for his shirts and his headbands and his, his socks and stuff, I think. But yeah, he kind of, he's quite a slim fella as well, isn't he? So his eyes sort of were back in the sockets, weren't they, when he's lost that water.
And that was usually me, the one that sweats a lot. But so I know how he feels. But he really stood up. We needed some runs. It didn't seem, him and Will Young dug in, and when Young went out, it felt like, okay, it almost, when Young was in, it felt like Mitchell was going to leave the field because he was so destroyed. And then Young went out, and he must have gone, I can't go now. Like, I can't walk off the field with Blundell coming into to bat, with Phillips in next, then our tail. And he dug in and, he got us to a total that probably at the time we thought wasn't enough, a little bit too short, but then went on and really contributed at slip, kind of just did everything we wanted to see from him. But Young's the one that stands out, right? Young, he won Player of the Series. He looked super, super comfortable against spin, probably more than anyone, I think, in both teams, I think, out of, maybe Jaiswal probably is the other person who, looked the goods every time they came to the crease. But Will Young seemed to have more time than everyone. Maybe Baldy, Binksy, Raj, you guys can talk to me about, is that just because he picks the length up early? What's the situation there?
For me, he just looked a lot more organised in defence. You mentioned the spinners, but also facing the likes of Bumrah, he was actually playing a very simple game. If it's in this area, I'm going to defend that straight back down the ground to him. If it's outside of that, I'll choose to either leave it or try and score runs. But I think he batted incredibly well, averaged about high 40s, I think, in the entire series. Will Young, but just sort of going back to your Mitchell statement, I think that, Will Young has done such a great job, but he's going to be forced out of the side if they want to retain Daryl Mitchell in the side. And Daryl Mitchell averaged 30. He had sort of one really good innings, which was an important innings. But it's one of those ones which is papered over by victory again. if we had lost, if there was losing happening, it's one of those things that gets picked up and goes, okay, where is the sort of weak links in this side? And Daryl Mitchell has performed well for us for a long time. I'm not for 1 second suggesting that he should be dropped, but Will Young is going to get dropped from the side when Williamson comes back in, unless there's injuries.
Yeah, Binksy, Bully, do you guys think there's a way for Young to stay in?
Only if Devon Conway keeps wicket or gets dropped. I think that's the only, you either drop Blundell and Devon Conway keeps wicket in Test cricket.
Well, he couldn't keep him.
Adam's head's about to explode on the camera on the other side of the world.
I think it would. I think if you're going down that route, it would have to be Latham. I think Latham, he's a much better keeper than Conway. He'd have to then move to 6. Binksy, you could talk about how challenging that would be to open the batting, keep and captain the side. I think that's too much to ask for someone who's just taken over.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see you needing to take that particular set of decisions really at the moment. Devon Conway, I think, has still got enough credit in the bank. You'd suggest to continue. Will Young's just going to be one of those guys that's unlucky potentially. That he's going to perform a similar role, and I mean this in. I'm not drawing this comparison, but he's going to play a similar role to Kane. He's the glue at 3 in the order. Daryl Mitchell has the ability to do something very, very special batting at 5 and take a game away from a team, and that's why he's going to be inked into that lineup. So I just think it is one of those scenarios where he's unlucky that his contemporary is perhaps one of the greatest batters to ever play the game, and he's kept the seat warm really, really nicely throughout the course of the summer, or the winter, I should say.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because you want to reward him, you want to say you've done a tremendous job, but I just don't see how you do it. And the only other pathway is, I think, if you go, Glenn Phillips, you are our number 1 spinner and you bat 8, or you reshuffle the order or whatever, and you have 3 spinners and Philip, or three seamers, and Phillips is your 4th bowler. But it doesn't feel like he could quite be there in New Zealand conditions yet. Is that? Yeah, I think that's pushing the boat out, right?
I think you're creating a problem to solve a problem there. Is what you're trying to do, right?
You're trying to keep the stock price high, and look, sometimes stock just does ebb and flow. And can we talk a little bit about India? And I guess where they're going to go. You kind of look at, I guess, even just the batting stats for them. Washington Sundar topping their series averages, albeit due to a bit of red ink, I think, in a couple of the innings. Rishabh Pant's return to Test cricket, or continued return to Test cricket, was good, and we obviously saw an important knock from Shubman Gill in that third Test. But then we've got to look a long way down the batting list to see where your big guns, Virat, Kohli and Rohit Sharma, are averaging around about 15 apiece, I think, throughout this series. Are India going to be able to write this off as a 3-game blip and continue with the same side, or do we think that there's going to need to be some changes, and do we see the BCCI making some tough calls?
For me, this 100%. The answer to that question will be able to be answered after the Australian tour, which we're about to see coming up. If they go to Australia and they win the series, if they perform well, there's a line that's just gone straight through that New Zealand series, and they move on to what's in the future. It's the sort of the guys you're talking about, the Rohit Sharmas, the Virat Kohlis, these guys who have a real aura within Indian cricket, and I don't want to say the word ousting, but getting rid of them from the team is not something that anyone would do lightly. There has to be some real evidence. You talked about making sure that players get 1 game more than less. I think that's how you said it. These guys fall into that category. And now that they're not playing sort of the white ball stuff, or certain white ball formats, and they've freed themselves up to play the red ball stuff, I think that that's where their focus will be. There's a lot riding on those guys that you mentioned for this tour coming up. I think that's where the questions will start to arise if things go awry.
Yeah, the question will be asked and answered by the time we get through the Border Gavaskar Trophy, because one, let's never write off a champion, and Rohit Sharma and Virat Kohli in particular are absolute champions of Indian cricket. We are privileged to watch them in our cricketing lifetime, right? playing devil's advocate, though, by the end of the Australia series, if Virat and Rohit in particular have poor series with the bat, and let's throw KL Rahul into that mix, the three of them. Let's just say the three of them all play the majority of the series and have a poor series with the bat. By then it's too late for India from a World Test Championship perspective, because if they go down, let's say 4-1 against Australia in that Border Gavaskar Trophy, they are out of the World Test Championship, just about.
They might have to win 3. They might have to win 4-0. They might have. I think there are scenarios where they can win up as few as 2 and still make it. But I think realistically, 3 would be the least that they could win and still make that World Test Championship final. So yeah, they've got to win this series.
By that stage, if they persist with these guys and they have a low run of scores, it could be too late by the time they really want to make a change from a World Test Championship perspective. And then it becomes a case of, okay, let's usher in the new era of players. But once you start to do that, you've got a fairly inexperienced batting lineup around them. Chock full of talent, don't get me wrong. But where's the guy in that side that's played 45 test matches that's going to come in behind and anchor that innings? You're now talking about Shubman Gill and Rishabh Pant being the mainstays of that Indian middle order. So their succession plan doesn't quite line up from a timeline perspective to drop those guys now. They need a little bit more out of Kohli in particular to shepherd in this new generation of the likes of Sarfraz and Jaswal and the guys coming in behind him and that are playing in this India A series, to have some senior guys in there when they get in to foster continuity in that batting lineup going forward.
I find it hard to... I still do find it hard to think, like 3 weeks have gone by and India, we were talking about them as easily the best team in the world, and now suddenly, like, they're not a bad side now. Like, we have to remember that they're still a good side. But I think what this series has done is it's sort of put the microscope on all of their players and all of, I think potentially the setup as well, in terms of Gambhir. I don't know how, I would love to know from Indian fans, fire it in the comments. I'd love to know your thoughts on whether you've noticed anything that has changed in terms of, their way they play their cricket or the way that they're going about media and comments and all that sort of stuff with Gambhir, because it did seem to me that the calmness of their side wasn't really there. There was a lot of sort of frenetic behaviour. I know we've sort of seen that from Rohit throughout the past 12 months. It's been his remit to go out, hit the ball from ball one and get things going, put them on the front foot. And when that's worked, it's been great. When it didn't work in this series, particularly, I think about that final innings of the third test, it gave us a chance. As soon as he was out, New Zealand were like, bang, we're in here. We've got a wicket early. That's what we wanted. We've opened up the door, and now we can try and attack some of these other guys. Ajaz had given, or the left-arm spinners had given Shubman Gill trouble throughout the whole series. We knew that. I was thinking Jaiswal's the big one here, and then we're into Kohli, who's struggling. He's, you could see he's a bit mixed. He ran himself out in that first innings, and then Sarfraz is a slow starter. We saw... It put the microscope on some of the frailties within that side. And I still think, they're a fantastic side, but it made everyone look at things a lot harder because they weren't winning.
I also think that they actually, this is going to sound strange, I think they created some frailties to their lineup as well by the wickets that they played on. Sort of took away Jasprit Bumrah's power, took away the pacer's power. You can see already in Australia playing the sort of warm-up matches, you can see the likes of Shadi Krishna just flying through to the keeper. It's going to be frightening seeing Jasprit Bumrah get that through to the keeper and just opening up that other side of their bowling attack and giving them the opportunity to take wickets. I still think that India is the best test side in the world. Just because we beat them doesn't make us the best test side in the world, although I think we should try and claim that. But definitely they're 100% the best test side in the world, the most well-balanced, and they just need... It might be that they're, leaving India might actually freshen them up a little bit. Leaving home where they've got a lot of pressure on them, going to Australia where, they're not carrying this massive, short favourite tag at the moment, going in there and just playing cricket. And it might work for them. And
they can get aggressive. They can get.
It's going to be a very chippy series.
Yeah, 100%. They will get right in Australia's face, and I expect them to be very, very, very aggressive in that series, and they should be, because now they are answering questions. We've gone for a long, long time asking no questions, really, from a critical analytical perspective about what is good or bad about this Indian team. Now questions are starting to be asked because they've lost a couple of games. That doesn't make them a bad side overnight, but it does force you to ask questions and have a think about actually what is going on here. And there's some of the questions that are being asked by us and by the Indian fans as well.
And Binksy, do you think that I'd love to get your view on sort of the change? Like, do you think there'll need to be changes in the way they set up that side? I mean, we're going to Australia. We don't expect they'll probably need 3 spinners, so the bowling attack might change there. But anything else that you look at that side and the way they played in that series and think they need to reshuffle something?
I think probably the one thing they need to do, I think, is the approach that they take. So I think the Rohit Sharma at the top of the order are trying to actually take it on and put India on the front foot. I think it's a little bit different with a Kookaburra ball. You get a little bit less time as a bowling side. You know, you've only got 10, 12 overs, Michael, really with that Kookaburra ball. So I think he's got to play a little bit within his sort of shell, because then he can really start to put pressure on from over 12 or whatever on. I think it's gone out of the game a little bit, but giving the first half hour to the bowler seems to have completely sort of disappeared out of the game. It's been, no, let's put the pressure on. So I think that would be something I would be suggesting that they do. I agree with what Raj said. India are still the best side. I was just asking the provocative question: when you've got 2 gun players averaging 15, you have to ask that question in a series. I don't think they're going to be worried from a bowling perspective, because I think historically, and I'm talking about historically 10, 15-year window, you'd think about India's spin stocks always being quality, and that they were trying to find seam stocks to do what they've done, which is get themselves into a situation where they can win anywhere in the world, and obviously have done that in Australia. They've got the seaming stock to do that with, obviously, Bumrah, who we talked about, Shami, who we've talked about, Siraj, whoever you want to name on that list of seamers. And then I think the other point, and you already made it, is just they'll enjoy being in Australia. I think I recall Virat Kohli talking about how much he enjoyed being able to walk around Sydney. And yes, people are going to recognise him wherever he goes, but it isn't like being in Mumbai. He said, I can walk down the street, and yes, I got to do a few selfies and the odd. Do people do autographs anymore? I don't know. But he was able to kind of walk down George Street and, have a little browse in some shops and enjoy sort of being out and about in the city. And the same will go for the rest of that Indian squad as well. So I think they'll really enjoy Australia. And look, probably 2 or 3 tests in, we are gonna see plenty of needle, and that's when David Warner comes back into the side, isn't it? To just provide that edge with his witty repartee.
Baldy, what about the spinners though? Because it was interesting, sort of seeing, the way that I think Ashwin in particular he just wasn't a feature really in the series in the way that I thought he would be. At times, Sundar certainly did outshine him. Jadeja, I still think Jadeja on turning pitches, Jadeja, the way he goes about things, and just same kind of thing as I said with Ajaz in terms of just putting it in the right spot. Jadeja does it from a higher release point and at a quicker pace, and some of the balls that he bowls are just simply unplayable. But I'm fascinated to see what happens with Ashwin in this Border Gavaskar, because I mean, you'd be brave to say that Washington Sundar has surpassed him, but he sort of did in this series in the way that he was used, at least given more opportunities to bowl. I don't think we will see that, but the Lion Ashwin battle has always been quite a feature of the way Australia and India, whenever they've met, it's been a feature of the series, at least for me watching on. Where do you think India are at with their spin stocks going into Australia, and how? Because I don't think they'll be able to play 3 in a game, even though Sundar, Ashwin, and Jadeja can all bat very, very well.
Yeah. So a lot to unpack there. It's okay for Washington Sundar to outpoint Ravichandran Ashwin in one series, and we don't have to overreact to that, right? In the same way that India is still the best test side in the world, Ravichandran Ashwin is still at the moment the best spin bowler in the world. Nothing has changed there in the last 3 weeks. All that's changed is that Washington Sundar has had a really good series and Ashwin has had by his standards, not as good a series as we would expect. And he hasn't dominated the opposition as we expect him to when he plays cricket at home. If we look back to the last time India toured Australia, Ashwin took Lions lunch money, bought all his mates lollies, and then everyone sat down and Lion had to watch them eat all the lollies while Ashwin just stood and just kind of giggled at him and had this kind of going on. He ate Lion's lunch the last time that India went to Australia. So same with Kohli and Rohit. You can't write off a champion. He is still, in my mind, their number one spinner. He should be the first man on the bowling team sheet alongside Jasprit Bumrah. But what you say is true. What gives Sundar and Jadeja pause for confidence going into that series is they can all bat. And if you have a top 5 with Punt at 5, and then you have, some combination of Ashwin, Sundar and Jadeja at 6, 7 and 8, then you can still play 3 seamers and have a really balanced bowling attack in Australia, and your tail's not long. The challenge with India sometimes is they've gone to Australia with a more seam-heavy attack, and their tail starts at 8. And Australia can have in the past exposed India when they get past their top 7 and they think, okay, well, actually 8, 9, 10 jack, we can roll that side for 40 runs. I think lower order runs are going to be super important in this Australian series. India's 6, 7, 8, Sundar, Ashwin, Jadeja, Akshar have bailed India out on a number of occasions where India have been 140, 150 for 5 over the last 3 years or so. So having some combination of those guys, I think, is going to be really important for them going forward.
The important point actually that you made there was, as a New Zealander watching that third test, I was actually quite concerned with Akashdeep batting at 10. Their batting lineup looked super, super long in that last test. So that's a really important point. And just on the Ashwin stuff, we have to remember that we lost a day in the first test. The fourth test, the second test, the fourth innings was very short, and then in the third test it went how many days? A few days. It was a weekend. It was a weekend match. So it's not like they had the opportunity to stretch the legs, bowled long spells, bowl into the fourth, fifth day. It didn't really sort of happen that way, and we forget that just because it's India doesn't mean that they don't benefit from going long deep into the tests.
Binksy, one thing you mentioned on our Slack channels at one point, maybe we can loop back around if there's anything else on this series, but one thing you mentioned that I thought was quite interesting was you were saying this was that third test was another case for 4-day tests. Do you want to expand on that? And is that actually you think we should be moving to 4-day tests?
The Slack channel is also really good for preparing people for questions like that. How I make lots of comments after a couple of gin and tonics and then forget about them. So look, my point really was that I think we are just seeing so many more games now not make it anywhere near that near that 5th day. And I think, to be perfectly honest, and this could turn into a hell of a podcast if we continued on this point, it's the same as the clamour for the 4-day work week in the corporate world, isn't it? What we're saying is we think, or what I'm saying is I think we can look at condensing the content of a 5-day test match into 4 days so that we can potentially ease the schedules a little bit more, because I think we've got to look at those significantly. We might touch upon it when we talk about England in West Indies at the moment. We've got guys playing 1-day international cricket that have never played a game of 1-day cricket domestically because there just isn't a way to get that into, for example, England's domestic summer because it clashes with T20 competitions. So my point really was that I think that there has to be a conversation about that. Everywhere around the world, we are seeing, the technology and the preparation of pitches has improved greatly. And then I think the biggest thing for me, and Baldy will probably have more of the history on this, we used to have timeless test matches. I think we started with 3-day test cricket or 4-day test cricket back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So it's not like the game hasn't changed and evolved for different reasons, whether it's the fact that In the 1940s and 1950s, there was a steamer ship waiting, and you could kind of. You had to play your test series and finish it by the time the boat left, and that meant you could carry on and play 9 days if you wanted to. So there's an evolution, I think, of the way that the world is working. I do think it's a genuine conversation as to whether we do something serious with over rates, start times, the use of floodlights and alternative cricket balls, so that that doesn't become an issue. But then to condense Test cricket into a 4-day package, which I think would also make it better for broadcasters. I think it would arguably make it better for the venues as well. At the moment, I would not want to be the chief executive of a stadium that's got a staff concession stalls and bars and that kind of stuff for 5 days, knowing that there's a pretty decent chance you might only get 3 and a bit days revenue out of that. Whereas, with a 4-day piece, and Baldy might do some stats on this as we move forward, I think that's probably the sweet spot in terms of getting into the 4th day, and providing that, that balance between the on-field or the in-ground experience, the broadcast experience, and the players' experience as well. So that was really where that thought came from, I think.
Binksy signed you up for a few things there.
He has. That's fine. No, I'm happy to be voluntold for all those things because they all involve stats, so that's fine. No problem with that.
The biggest one for me is that we have series going on around the world right now which are just devalued or cheapened because they don't have the the right amount of stars there. Like, I think, a lot of people would not realise that India is actually in South Africa playing a white ball series at the moment. They're one 2020 in of 4.
You had to update me.
We're talking about the aftermath of the Test series against New Zealand that happened last week. India A are playing Australia A in Australia right now in a 4-day game, and India are playing South Africa in South Africa in a T20.
New Zealand's just had a T20 against Sri Lanka.
Yeah. So, the schedule is so condensed that I'm not surprised that 5-day to 4-day test is becoming a scheduling-based conversation. There are all sorts of things that we have to unpack, and I'll unpack them for you, Binksy. Revenue, balls, people bowling their overs on time, floodlights, all of those light conditions is going to be a big one, rain delays and spare days for rain, all that kind of stuff is potentially stuff that we can unpack. But, it's looking more and more like something's got to give in the schedule, and maybe, having test matches that only ever go 4 days is a way to open up that schedule just a tiny little bit more.
My worry would be that they would say 4-day test means we could squeeze more in. That would be my only danger with all of that. But, maybe that's a nice segue now to the white ball stuff.
Yeah, look, just before we do, I think that the one thing I'd say is there's precedent for all of this, right? So England have played some 4-day tests at the start of the summers, I think most recently against Ireland. We've even had, rest days in test matches recently as well. So there is flexibility to do that within I don't know what the word is, the constitution or the charters that the team are signed up to. But white ball cricket abundant. Where are we going to start? Because there are obviously 10 main playing nations, and there's 47 series going on currently around the world. So which one do we want to start with?
Not the Australia-Pakistan series. Anything but that.
Well, maybe that's that though. Why is it just been terrible?
No, let's do it last because then we'll be able to announce the result of Pakistan. Just about chasing down Australia's 140.
I think we could call that electorate if we wanted to.
Yeah, 97% of precincts are already in. Yep. Yes,
not even the postal votes are going to save Australia at this point.
Well, what about you then, Binksy? Is anything like, have you managed to what's the buzz going around England about this white ball series with the West Indies? And
maybe we can explore another comment you put on the Slack channel about how Liam Livingstone is impressing you.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Buzz about the England team. So, look, as most listeners and viewers probably know, if you're regulars to the podcast, I've moved back to the UK. There isn't a lot going on in terms of the press. These games are on a minor sports channel here, so they're not on the Premier Sky Sports channel, which is where you get most England cricket. So it's hidden away on TNT Sports. There's very little press coverage of it, to be perfectly honest. And I think, the other thing is when you look at the side that is playing, because there is a little bit more crossover, I think, in England's white ball and red ball sides now. And I think we'll see even more crossover when Brendan McCullum takes over full time in January, February of both the white ball and the red ball stuff. Realistically, the one-day team that we took to India, and this is not an excuse, and this is not diminishing the West Indies performance in that 50-over stint at all, but it would be our B/C team in terms of the available cricketers. The concerning fact is we just don't know how to play 50-over cricket, and I think I mentioned earlier on, a lot of that I think that is down to the fact that our Royal London Cup, which is the 50-over domestic competition, has been being used almost as a development tournament in the UK. It still has, obviously, List A status, but when you look at the teams that are playing in it, it's played during the same time as the 100. So none of the England players are playing, none of the overseas players of note are playing, and then you've got that next group of players that are getting some ability to play a format that's very rarely played anywhere else. And then look, you then fast forward to the T20 that happened overnight. We've had some struggles in T20 obviously over the course of the last wee while, but let's not forget we won the World Cup in 2022, only one instance of that tournament ago. But the stark difference between, chasing down 180 in 16 overs, a Phil Salt 100, it's just, for me, if there's a talking point at the moment, it is the stark difference between our one-day cricket in the 50-over format and the 20-over format is the big thing. Final points for me really is it's great to see Jofra Archer back. He had a pretty lean series in terms of wickets in that one-day international series, but he was on the park for all of it, which I think was really, really important. And then, look, I think it's also nice that we've seen a couple of guys, Jacob Bethel and Dan Mousley, come in. I think they're going to be fixtures of our white ball squads and teams moving forwards. And yeah, look, I've got to admit, I'm not wrong about Liam Livingstone, because he still hasn't stood up in a big tournament and won us a big game, but he was really, really good in parts of that one-day international series. And he can play. He can really, really play. I just want to see him do it on the biggest stage, which, as an Englishman, the biggest stage is going to be an ICC white ball tournament for him. And he's not done that. And I really hope that he does. But thank you, Raj, for, again, just calling me out and my, comments around he's useless and then he goes and gets a massive match-winning 100. Thank you very much.
That's all right. It's normally me that makes those kind of silly comments and has to walk things back.
I'll quickly just what I'm looking for from this New Zealand Sri Lanka series. It's really, again, like you said, Minxie, it's some of the new faces. New Zealand sent most of our test playing unit back to New Zealand to sort of prepare for this white ball series or for the red ball series against England. Now we win that series 3-0 and we've got a chance to actually sneak into the World Test Championship. In a way, I think 3-0 against England is almost feels now quite a tricky prospect in terms of what we've got to do, but it leaves that door open. But I think for the one name, everyone wants Mitch Hay. Everyone's sort of looking at Mitch Hay because of Blundell's struggles in the last, particularly in this series and in Sri Lanka. Mitch Hay, if Mitch Hay could buy a run, that would be nice. He's sort of really, really struggled to start the domestic season. He got another duck last night. Patirana nicked him off, sort of a loose-ish shot outside the off stump. But Zach Foulkes is the one that me in particular, I've got my eye on because, I remember 2 or 3 years ago, Raj, when he was just making his debut, you and I were, here in New Zealand, you can go onto the New Zealand Cricket website, you can look at all of the wickets and fours and sixes and stuff. You can actually now watch the live streams of most of the domestic games. and you and I we must have been just focused on some of the same scorecards, and Zach Foulkes would run in and take a wicket, and there's just something about him. He's just, people talk about he's got the it factor or whatever. He does. And yesterday, first game of the T20 series is another one overnight. Picked up a couple of wickets, hit a big six off Patirana. He's got something special, and I think if he can put in a big performance, maybe he puts himself in the mix for that fourth seamer. If we're going to have four seamers in the Test series, it's probably a little bit early. I think Nathan Smith will probably have the upper hand in terms of that sort of job, because he's just been given a contract, all that kind of stuff. But he's certainly someone that I'm watching and thinking, could he be a fixture in our side?
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it, because I can't really describe it. It's a little bit extra something. Maybe it's just because it's the domestic sort of scene in New Zealand, but he just looks a little bit a cut above it. Someone who can bowl like that, get that extra zip, and then, is good enough to go out and open the batting. He tried that for a while. I think he might have dropped back down now, but, has that ability to go out there and he can really, develop into a great sort of all-round resource for us. So he's someone I'm looking at. The other one is a Lockie. I see is on tour. I'm not sure if he played in that
Didn't play last night. So
he's the other one I'm looking forward to watching him, get those speed gun radar up there. But, that's really all I'm looking for. In my notes here, I've got, the question was, what are we watching out for? And my initial comment is nothing really. Again, it sort of really cheapens international cricket a little bit when we have these sort of, BC sides go away. But we've unpacked that a lot in the last 5 minutes.
All I'm looking at in this series is Mitch Hay. It is a big series for him as far as his progression and his career goes. If he nails the series, people are going to start talking about him as being in this New Zealand Test side going forward, and in the one-day side as well, when everyone's available. I think it's a super important series for him. It's a shame that he didn't make a score, but we've seen lots of people in auditions not make scores in the last sort of fortnight. And he won't be the first and he won't be the last, but I think it's important for Mitch Hay. He's the one I'm looking at.
What about Aussie now? Can we talk about Aussie?
Do we have to?
Well, they're not going very well against Pakistan. Is there anything about this series, or do we just kind of mention the squad that's been selected and the opening berth, I suppose, for the Test squad that there was a lot of questions about, and you guys sort of went back and forth on last week, and now we seem to have an answer to that question.
I could have given you a 15-minute breakdown without pause or repetition after that first India A, Australia A game, because there was so much to unpack. I want to talk briefly about this 3 ODI series against Pakistan. Australia won up 10 ODI games on the trot through the World Cup and after. This is the worst Australia has looked as a one-day international side in my living memory. This is the worst series we've played that I can remember since I was 4 years old. They have been terrible in this series. They can't bat through the power play. No one can structure an innings and put together any innings of substance either at the top or through the middle order. And if it wasn't for Pat Cummins and his ability to bat Australia out of trouble, we would be down 3-0 in this series against Pakistan. And it would be the worst home series performance I think we would have ever put on the park. Not in terms of results, but just in terms of the lackluster, lack of bottle, of metal, of any kind of heart and ticker in an Australian side. And it's not because the guys aren't trying, but it's because they're going about their cricket the wrong way. They are going hell for leather at the top of the order because they think they have to get 100 off the first 8 overs. And if they're losing 2-3 quick wickets in the power play, none of their middle order have got any metal about them to be able to ride out that period of time and make 40 or 50 or 60 important Michael Bevan runs or Damien Martin runs or Steve Waugh runs through that middle over and get Australia to 220 to 230, scores that they could potentially defend, because they have one of the best bowling attacks in world cricket. Even their backup guys, Spencer Johnson, Bartlett, Ellis, etc., are good players. But if you're only scoring 140 runs, it's 140 runs not enough in the modern game. And you can get to 280 without being 80 for 4 in the 8th over.
And it really sort of disappoints me that we've gone here to a decider in the third one-dayer, and they've made 5 changes to the Australian. So obviously there's a focus on other things coming this summer, and
100%.
They're sort of limiting the minutes, if you will.
Yep.
And from the batting side, is there anyone missing? from there, or do you think this is the?
Oh yeah, there's guys missing. So Travis Head and Mitchell Marsh are both missing from this Australian side. Smith and Labuschagne have played a couple of games, but they've sat out this last game. So if you have a look at the Australian side that's playing at the moment live in Perth, there's no Head, there's no Marsh at the top of the order. So there's 2 spots for Matthew Short and Jake Fraser-McGurk to try and audition for this Champions Trophy. They've not put their best foot forward in this series, and they'll be very disappointed with their output. Fraser-McGurk in particular, because he has not ridden out. He's done a finale effectively. He's either 100 or bust, and he's gone bust. He's basically got to 17 and decided that he's going to hit, and the dealer's showing a 4 or a 5. Right? He has to get past that first 5 or 6 overs and earn the right to be 20 off 20 and then be 60 off 40. You know what I mean? And he hasn't earned that right in this series. And I think a lot of Australian fans have been very disappointed by that. The middle order, you have a look at Hardy, you have a look at Cooper Connolly, you have a look at the guys in the middle order in this series. I think there was a stat on the Crick Info commentary earlier today. None of the Australian top 6 have an average over 35 in list day cricket at the moment. And then you've got Maxwell coming in at 7. And Maxwell, just like Mitch Hay, can't buy a run. So I know that there are personnel changes to make in that Australian side going forward, and we'll be much stronger for that. But really, none of the guys have stepped up and put any pressure on that established top 6, top 7 for Australia. And the big guns that are there have not also helped their younger teammates out by steadying the ship and providing some leadership in that batting group.
The other thing that I've drawn a parallel with is the Pakistan bowling attack is very, very quick. It's very quick. Harris Ralph has been causing some real problems for the Australians, but you liken that to what the Indians might throw up, later on in the summer.
Yep.
And there's an interesting parallel there going, are they going to be able to score 300-400 when they need to?
It's always been a question for that Australian batting lineup, especially for Marnus at 3. Marnus has been nicked off by guys bowling 5th, 6th stump at 145 plus pretty regularly over the last 2-3 years. So it's not surprising that Harris Ralph in particular, having played a lot of domestic white ball cricket in Australia, and particularly in the Big Bash, is the one that's doing the damage because he knows those surfaces so well. He knows the weaknesses of those Australian players, and he was able to exploit that better than anyone. But that Pakistan attack, when they are on, they look super good, and we have to give them credit. They've played some terrific cricket in this series. Sam Ayub looks like a world beater again. He's started to find some form, and we know at 22 that he's got a bright future ahead of him. So there is a lot to like about this Pakistan side, and to be fair to them, they have outplayed Australia absolutely in this series.
Do you want to say anything about McSweeney before we finish up?
Yeah, so we can. I mean, the cat's out of the bag, and we've buried the lead here, but Australia have announced their test squad to play in the first test of this Border Gavaskar series.
Just the first test?
Yep. So they've only named the squad for the first test. So of the 4-way bat off in Mackay and Melbourne, it's Nathan Sweeney, who's never opened in the first class game before this week, will make his debut as an Australian opener. First one since we had, I think, a guy Rich Robertson or Vic Robinson in the 70s was the last time that we had a guy who came in and opened the batting, having never batted at first class level before. So the selectors have decided that it's not quite a vote of no confidence that they've come out and said that we don't believe in Harris and Bancroft, but it's pretty damning that you're prepared to pick a guy who is a good batter, who bats at 3 for South Australia, who is touted as being potentially a future Australian leader going forward, to bat him at the top of the order rather than the established guys of Harris and Bancroft. They failed just at the wrong time. They didn't rubber stamp their audition with a big score in either innings. Harris batted okay.
Harris has scored runs in the domestic scene, and he scored a good 70 in the.
He did, but I think they weren't really looking at him. I think they were looking at Bancroft and Constas and McSweeney, and Harris would have had to score 140 or 150 to put his name in lights, because realistically, I think in terms of the pecking order, Bancroft is slightly ahead of Harris. And if you're not going to go with Bancroft and you're not going to go with Harris, then you are talking about a 19-year-old kid who still hasn't played at all of the Australian Test venues yet. He is going to be a terrific batter for Australia going forward, but it's okay that you don't pick him for another year, that you let him play another series of domestic cricket against Australia and play at the Gabba. I don't think he's played at the Gabba yet. I don't think he's played in Perth yet. I'm not sure that he's played in Adelaide yet. I think he's only played in Sydney and Melbourne. I might be wrong there, But, he's only played 6 or 7 first-class games. So it's okay to pump the brakes on that kid. He looks like he's a good player. McSweeney also a very good player. But, it's interesting that Australia have plumped to replace David Warner with a guy who's never opened before and then replace that guy with another guy who's never opened before. So it remains to be seen whether that's a smart decision going forward. But the selectors' hands were forced by the fact that really, other than Harris's 70-odd, the two incumbent guys, or the guys most likely to get picked that are dedicated opening batters, just didn't put their hand up.
And the other interesting thing is they picked both Carey and Inglis for that first test. Binksy, you'll be glad to know Michael Vaughan was on the innings break coverage, and he suggested that maybe we're getting to a state of cricket now where we need to share the responsibilities behind the stumps with the gloves. We have so many part-time wicketkeepers or wicketkeepers who bat or batsmen who keep that maybe there is a instance, for example, when you mentioned Tom Latham, if he goes if he's going to be the keeper, he'll go out and open the batting in the first innings first day, but maybe if it's not first innings first day, he bats at 6. I don't know. There's all these kind of ramifications. I kind of dismissed it straight away as I was listening. Adam Gilchrist was being very nice, but said, no, I don't really agree with you. But look, always looking at innovation. What are your thoughts on that and the choice of Inglis and Carey in the side?
Yeah, look, interesting to get Bordy's take on McSweeney at the top of the order. I guess that Inglis is there. He's there as batting cover as well, isn't he?
Yes.
So I think if anyone goes down, and that would include, I think, if McSweeney breaks a finger in the nets on the day before, you would expect Inglis will come in and they'll probably stick him at the top of the order and say, right, go out and perform that David Warner role. So that's why he's in the side. As for Michael Vaughan, I think, look, I agree wholeheartedly with his points. I think we should be mixing things up like that and giving people some time off. And I'd extend that to the commentary box, so he can just not turn up. As far as I'm concerned, that's the biggest load of horseshit I've ever heard. To be perfectly honest, there isn't a keeper in the world who would want to leave the gloves in the bag and not go out and keep with kit if that's their job. What a load of absolute dross.
Yeah, and just to confirm, Inglis is batting cover for anywhere in the top 6, and I think you'd makeshift the opener. I think if McSweeney was injured in the nets or whatever, touch wood that he's not, I think Inglis would come in and probably slot in at 5. He's made runs so far this season, Inglis. He looks like he's in reasonable form. He's a very, very good player, a very, very good white ball player for Australia as well. So yeah, he won't be out of place if he gets called up in that first test.
And we're primed for a full preview. The timing has worked out perfectly. We can fully preview that series next week.
Yeah, fantastic. Looking forward to it. I'll be able to talk, like I said, without pause or repetition, at least on that breakdown of the India A series and this preparation for Australia v India. It's going to be a cracker.
Well, there you go, folks. You know exactly what's hitting your feed this time next week. It will be a preview of the border at Gavaskar. We will also have a test series preview, won't we, of England and New Zealand as well, which there'll be some equal talking points, I think, for both sides leading into that series. We touched upon a number of them today, talking about that New Zealand side, but England bring in a little bit of a different looking squad than was here last time to that 3 test match series. So we'll talk about that on a future episode of the podcast as well. But it is going to be goodbye and God bless from us all here on the Top Order podcast. Thanks very much for listening or watching, and we'll see you next week.